My ex-husband tried to take my house by claiming I couldn't afford it. In court, he told the judge, she's behind on payments. I quietly presented bank statements showing I paid off the mortgage in full. His lawyer's confidence disappeared instantly. Divorcing my ex-husband, Mark, was the best decision I ever made. He was a liar, a cheater, and the kind of guy who always thought he was the smartest person in the room. Spoiler, he wasn't. We were married for 12 years. During that time, we built a life together, or at least, I thought we did. We bought a house in Charlotte, North Carolina, in 2010. Nothing fancy, just a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom ranch-style house in a quiet neighborhood. It was supposed to be our forever home. I worked as a nurse, and Mark was a project manager. We made decent money, but I was the one who kept track of the finances. I made sure bills were paid, the mortgage was on schedule, and that we were actually building a future instead of just spending money on random junk. Mark, on the other hand, had no clue what our financial situation really looked like. He just assumed we were fine. And maybe we were, until I found out he was cheating. How the divorce happened. Mark wasn't even good at hiding it. He was using our joint credit card to pay for fancy dinners, hotel stays, and even a freaking subscription to an adult content site. He wasn't just having an affair, he was funding it with our household money. The woman he was seeing? Some girl from his office named Tina, who was at least 10 years younger and clearly didn't care that she was dating a married man. I was done. I got my ducks in a row, hired a lawyer, and filed for divorce. In North Carolina, you have to be legally separated for a full year before you can finalize a divorce. During that time, we agreed, in writing, that I would keep the house and he would keep his precious Mustang and the bulk of his retirement. We each kept our own separate accounts, and I stayed in the house, paying the mortgage myself. The divorce was finalized in 2018, and by then, I had refinanced the home under my name and started making extra payments. I worked overtime shifts, budgeted like crazy, and poured every extra dollar I had into paying off the house as fast as I could. By 2021, I had done it, the mortgage was fully paid off. The house was mine. Mark, on the other hand, had moved in with Tina, and they were renting an expensive apartment in South End. I hadn't heard much from him since the divorce. As far as I was concerned, he was in the rearview mirror. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. The lawsuit that came out of nowhere. Early 2023. I was at work when I got served with court papers. Mark was suing me. For half the house. I thought it was a joke at first. But nope, he was serious. Apparently, Tina had convinced him that he was legally entitled to his share of the home. His argument? The house was bought during our marriage, and my name was originally on the mortgage, so I should get half. I was furious. This man hadn't paid a single cent toward the mortgage since 2018. He had taken his Mustang, his retirement, and the freedom to live his new life with Tina. Meanwhile, I had spent the last 5 years working my ass off to pay off this house. Now he wanted a payout? Absolutely not. But Mark had hired a lawyer, a smug guy in a cheap suit named Mr. Whitman, who was more than happy to take his money and file the lawsuit. The courtroom showdown. The day of the hearing, I walked into that courtroom ready for war. Mark was already there, sitting at the table with his lawyer, looking smug. He really thought he was about to win. When the judge came in, Mark's lawyer, Mr. Whitman, stood up and started his speech. Your Honor, my client has reason to believe that the defendant is behind on her mortgage payments and is struggling financially. He is willing to relieve her of this burden by either selling the home and splitting the proceeds or taking over ownership himself. I almost laughed. Mark was sitting there, nodding along, acting like he was doing me some huge favor. Like he was saving me from financial ruin. What he didn't know, what his lawyer clearly didn't bother to check, was that I was not behind on anything. In fact, there was no mortgage anymore. My lawyer, a calm and collected man who knew exactly what was about to happen, stood up and responded. Your Honor, we have documented evidence that my client has paid off the mortgage in full. She is not behind on payments because there are no payments. The plaintiff, however, has contributed nothing since 2018. And then, without even looking at Mark, he handed a thick stack of bank statements to the judge. Mark's face changed instantly. His lawyer froze. The judge took the documents, flipped through them, and frowned. Judge, Mr. Carter, can you explain why you told this court that the defendant was behind on payments? Mark shifted in his seat. His smugness was completely gone. Mark, well. I thought, Judge, you thought? Did you do any due diligence before making these claims in a court of law? Mark glanced at his lawyer. Mr. Whitman, suddenly looking a whole lot less confident, cleared his throat and mumbled something about miscommunication. But the judge wasn't having it. "Judge, Mr. Whitman, did you advise your client to pursue this claim knowing there was no financial burden on the defendant?" At that moment, Mr. Whitman realized he had screwed up. He had filed a lawsuit based on lies. "Whitman, Your Honor, my client." "Judge, no, I want to hear from your client." Mark was sweating. His little plan was falling apart right in front of him. "Mark, I didn't know she paid it off." "Judge, you didn't know? You sued her for half of a house without even knowing the financial status of the property?" Mark was completely silent. The judge looked like he was barely restraining himself from rolling his eyes. "Judge, this lawsuit is completely without merit. The defendant's property ownership is valid, and the plaintiff has no legal claim to the house. And then, the best part, Judge, furthermore, I am ordering the plaintiff to cover the defendant's legal fees in full." Mark's mouth literally dropped open. His lawyer's face turned pale. From the back of the courtroom, I heard someone gasp. I turned slightly and saw Tina sitting in the gallery, staring at Mark like she just realized she hitched herself to an absolute idiot. I didn't smile. But I wanted to. The aftermath, or so I thought. Mark sat there, frozen, his jaw clenched so tight I thought he might break a tooth. His lawyer, Mr. Whitman, looked like he wanted to melt into his chair. The judge had made it clear, Mark had no claim to my house. I thought that was it. I thought I had one. But Mark wasn't done. Not by a long shot. A new plan to screw me over. A week after court, I started getting weird calls. Unknown numbers. No voicemails. At first, I ignored them. But then, I got a call from my bank. Someone had tried to access my mortgage records. I told them my mortgage was paid off. They confirmed it wasn't the bank, it was someone pretending to be me. I knew exactly who it was. Mark. I called my lawyer. He told me to report it immediately. So I did. But nothing happened. Apparently, attempted fraud wasn't a high priority. Fine. I changed every password, locked down my accounts, and put a fraud alert on my credit. If Mark thought he could mess with me, he was in for a rude awakening. But that wasn't the worst part. The anonymous report. A month passed. I was finally starting to relax. Then, I got a letter from the City of Charlotte Code Enforcement. Apparently, someone had reported my house as abandoned. They claimed the property had been unoccupied for months, that it was falling into disrepair, and, get this, that it was a squatter risk. I called the number on the letter, trying not to lose my mind. The guy on the phone was polite but firm. "Code enforcement, ma'am, we received multiple complaints. We have to send an inspector." "Me, I live here." "Code enforcement, if that's the case, it'll be cleared up quickly. But we still have to check." I knew exactly who was behind this. Mark was trying to get the city involved, hoping I'd get tangled in some bureaucratic nightmare. Maybe he thought I'd get so frustrated I'd sell the house just to get rid of the problem. Not happening. The inspection. 2 days later, a city inspector showed up. I was home, waiting. "Inspector, this house is clearly lived in." Me, no kidding. "Inspector, sorry about this. We have to follow up on reports." Me, "Can I see them?" The inspector hesitated, then handed me a printed complaint form. It was anonymous, of course, but the details were way too specific. It mentioned my backyard fence needing repairs, true, but minor, my old mailbox, which was slightly crooked, and a made-up claim that I had weeds over 2 feet tall. It was Mark. He was watching my house. I forced a smile. Me, "So, what happens now?" "Inspector, nothing. I'm marking this as a false report." He left. I shut the door and locked it. And then I called my lawyer. The bank account mystery. The next morning, I got another surprise. I checked my bank account like I did every day. My main account was fine. But when I clicked on my savings account, I noticed something odd. A transfer attempt, denied. Someone had tried to move $3,500 out of my account. I stared at the screen. I hadn't done that. My heart started pounding. I called the bank. "Bank rep, yes, we flagged that transaction. It was attempted from an unrecognized device." Me, "Who tried to do it?" "Bank rep, we can't give that information over the phone, but I recommend you file a fraud claim immediately." I hung up and drove straight to the bank. Turns out, someone had used my old login information and tried to reset my security questions. They had just enough outdated info to attempt it, but not enough to actually get in. I changed everything. Again. Then, I did what I should have done weeks ago. I hired a private investigator. What the private investigator found. I met with the investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Renee, at a coffee shop. I gave her the rundown. She nodded like she had seen this kind of thing 1,000 times. Renee, he's desperate. He thought he'd win in court. Now he's trying to shake you down another way. Me, how do we stop him? Renee, we find proof. She started digging. A week later, she called me back. Renee, we need to talk. You're not gonna like this. I met her at her office. She pulled up her laptop and turned it toward me. Renee, he's been watching you. On the screen was a grainy parking lot security camera still. It was outside a Home Depot near my house. And in the background, sitting in an old blue pickup truck, was Mark. The real plan. Renee dug deeper. She found more security footage of Mark in my neighborhood. He wasn't just driving by. He was sitting in his truck, parked down the street from my house, watching. My stomach turned. This wasn't just about money anymore. Mark was obsessed. I needed to stop him. And I needed to do it legally, before he tried something worse. I took a deep breath and looked at Renee. Me, what do we do now? She leaned back in her chair. And then she smiled. Renee, we set a trap. The trap. Renee leaned in, her smile sharp. Renee, we're gonna make him think he's winning. I didn't know exactly what she had in mind, but I was all ears. She explained that Mark was escalating. First, he tried the courts. Then he went after my finances. Now, he was lurking around my house. He's pushing boundaries. Testing what he can get away with, she said. If we don't stop him now, he'll try something worse. I felt a chill creep up my spine. Me. So, what do we do? Renee leaned forward. Renee, we make him think you're vulnerable. Then we catch him in the act. The fake notice. Step 1 of the plan. A little paperwork magic. Renee had connections, people who could get things done. Within a few days, I had a very official-looking document taped to my front door. It was a fake foreclosure notice. It looked real. The kind of thing that, if someone was snooping around, would make them think I was in trouble. That I was about to lose the house. Renee and I both knew Mark was watching. We just had to wait. The first mistake. Less than 48 hours after posting the fake notice, I got a call. It was from my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a sweet retired woman who had lived next door to me for years. Mrs. Henderson, honey, I don't want to alarm you, but I saw your ex-husband on your porch last night. Me. What? She told me she was up late watching TV when she saw a man sneaking up to my door. He ripped the notice off, read it, then took a picture of it with his phone before hurrying back to his truck. Mrs. Henderson, I wasn't sure if I should call the cops. I thanked her, trying not to let my hands shake. Mark had taken the bait. Renee was right on the money. The phone call. The next day, Mark called me. I let it ring, staring at his name on the screen. Then I hit ignore. 30 minutes later, he texted, Mark, I heard about the house. We need to talk. I didn't respond. Another text, Mark, I can help you. Call me. I stared at the message, my heart pounding. Renee was sitting across from me at my kitchen table. She smirked. Renee, he thinks you're screwed. He's about to make a move. Me, what kind of move? Renee, we'll find out. The secret meeting. 2 days later, Mark showed up at my work. I was at the hospital finishing up a shift when one of the security guards walked up to me. Security, there's a guy in the lobby asking for you. Says it's urgent. I already knew who it was. I took my time getting to the lobby, mentally preparing myself. When I walked in, there he was, Mark, looking way too confident for a man who just got humiliated in court. Mark, hey. I crossed my arms. Me, what do you want? He had the nerve to look sympathetic. Mark, I know things have been hard for you. I saw the foreclosure notice. I said nothing. Just let him talk. Mark, look. I don't want to fight. We can work something out. Maybe I take over the house, get things back on track. You can walk away, debt-free. I wanted to laugh in his face. But instead, I played along. Me, you do that? He nodded. Mark, of course. You shouldn't have to go through this alone. I forced my voice to shake just a little. Me, I don't know. I need time to think. Mark smiled. Like he actually believed I was falling for it. Mark, take your time. But don't wait too long. These things move fast. I just nodded. Then I turned and walked away. Mark had taken the bait, again. The break-in. The final nail in his coffin came 2 nights later. I was at Renee's office, going over documents, when my home security app sent me an alert. Motion detected, back door. Renee and I looked at each other. Then my phone buzzed again. Motion detected, living room. Someone was inside my house. Renee grabbed her keys. Renee, let's go. We drove fast. I called the cops on the way. 911 operator, are you home? Me, no, but my cameras are. And someone's inside. When we got there, 2 police cars were already outside. Mark was in handcuffs. He looked up as I got out of the car. Mark, this isn't what it looks like. One of the cops turned to me. Officer, do you know this man? Me, yeah. That's my ex-husband. The officer raised an eyebrow. Officer, he says he used to live here. I took a deep breath, loud enough for Mark to hear, and then said the magic words. Me, officer, I want to press charges for breaking and entering. Mark's face went white. I folded my arms and stared at him. For once, he had nothing to say. Mark sat in the back of the squad car, his hands cuffed behind his back, his face frozen in shock. He wasn't smirking anymore. The smugness, the confidence, it was all gone. The cops had caught him red-handed in my house. They had found my front door lock tampered with and my personal documents rummaged through. This wasn't just breaking and entering. It was premeditated burglary. Renee and I stood to the side as the officers sorted through the mess inside my house. My living room had been ransacked, drawers pulled open, files scattered. Officer, looks like he was looking for something. I already knew what. Me, bank records. Mortgage paperwork. Mark had been desperate to find proof that I was in financial trouble, that I couldn't keep the house. Except I wasn't in trouble. He was. The confrontation. One of the cops walked over to Mark. Officer, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Mark's eyes snapped to mine. Mark, are you really doing this? You're calling the cops on me? I stepped forward, arms crossed. Me, no, Mark. You did this to yourself. His face twisted with something I couldn't quite name. Anger? Panic? Regret? Mark, it wasn't like that. I was just, me, breaking into my house. He shook his head violently, pulling against the cuffs. Mark, I just needed to talk to you. I knew you were lying about the foreclosure. I laughed, the sound bitter. Me, lying? You're the one who made fake reports to the city. You stole my bank information. You tried to have my house taken from me, and now you're sitting here, pretending to be the victim? Mark clenched his jaw, breathing hard through his nose. Mark, this isn't fair. I put years into that house too. That sent a surge of rage through me. Me, no, Mark. I put years into that house. I worked the overtime shifts. I made the mortgage payments. And where were you? I took a slow step forward, my voice shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer anger boiling inside me. Me, you were out screwing some girl in a hotel that I paid for. Silence. The cops exchanged glances. Renee let out a low whistle. Mark's whole body sagged. He knew. He knew there was nothing left to say. The last desperate plea. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt like I had won. But as I stared at Mark, this man I had once loved, who had shared my bed, my life, my dreams, all I felt was tired. Mark, we can fix this. I blinked. Me, fix what? His voice cracked. Mark, us. For a moment, I actually thought he was joking. I let out a short, sharp laugh. Me, there is no us, Mark. He shook his head, desperate now. Mark, this got out of hand. I don't even care about the house. I just wanted you to. He stopped himself. I stepped closer. Me, you just wanted me to lose. His mouth snapped shut. And in that moment, I knew the truth. Mark didn't care about the house. Not really. He cared that I was doing better without him. That I had moved on, succeeded, survived. And that he hadn't. The officers were done waiting. "Officer, we're taking him in. Do you want to pursue full charges?" Mark turned to me, silent now. Waiting. Hoping I'd go easy on him. For a second, I actually thought about it. This was the man I had once loved. The man I had once dreamed of growing old with. But that man was long gone. What was left was this, a liar, a manipulator, a man so desperate to hurt me that he had ruined his own life in the process. Me, yes. Press full charges. Mark's face crumpled. As the cops led him to the squad car, he didn't fight it. He just looked at me one last time. And then he was gone. The next few weeks were surreal. I filed for a restraining order, and it was granted immediately. Tina. She dumped Mark the next day. Turns out, she wasn't interested in dating a guy who was now facing felony charges. And the Mustang he had fought so hard to keep? Repossessed. He had been barely making payments, banking on the idea that he'd get money from me. When that didn't happen, it was game over. Mark lost everything. And me? I still had my house. I still had my job. And most importantly, I had my peace. People always say revenge is sweet. That seeing someone who wronged you get what they deserve should feel satisfying. But the truth? It felt empty. Because at the end of the day, Mark wasn't some evil mastermind. He was just a sad, desperate man who couldn't accept that he had destroyed his own life. I wasn't the reason he lost. He was. And now? I don't think about him. I don't wonder what he's doing. I don't check old pictures or replay the past in my head. I just sit on my front porch, drink my coffee, and watch the sunrise over the house that is, and always will be, mine.